The DC-3 would revolutionize aviation. It became the most popular plane ever built. It saved American Airlines, not the company, but the nation's airlines. And during World War II, it was a troop transport. It helped save democracy. The DC-3 was so well built, the military ordered 12,000 of them. The Douglas plant in Long Beach, at the height of World War II, was building a DC-3 every 90 minutes. And all the military did to make it airworthy for the military was to add bigger shock absorbers and a larger door. For millions of GIs, the first time they ever flew was in a DC-3, affectionately called the Goonie Bird or the Dakota. Officially, it was the C-47. Thousands are still flying today. As a matter of fact, if you want to buy one, there's a DC-3 store in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. No DC-3 has ever gone down because of structural failure. But the failure of Knute Rockne's partially wooden plane led to the DC-3, the all-metal plane that would not fall apart. Planes got bigger, they got faster, they got larger, and suddenly, all of a sudden, the number of airline accidents skyrocketed. Test pilots and people such as Amelia Earhart were part of supper-time conversation, but so were much publicized grisly airline accidents. Something had to be done to reassure the flying public that it was safe to fly, even if their public relations was more propaganda than fact. The innovative answer that would turn confidence around was to do something we take for granted today, to add something to those planes: a flight attendant. A call went out for nurses. You see, the first flight attendants were all nurses. Every new flight attendant was told that her job was to provide a clean, hygienic environment. You see, back then, stewardesses were not in-flight waitresses, as we think of them today. They were there for medical reasons. You had to be a nurse, you had to be at least 25 years old, and have a spotless personal reputation, and be willing to clean up after people got sick. You see, back in the propeller era, planes flew inside the clouds, not above them. Air sickness was common. Older flight attendants still tell stories of constant vomiting, burns from hot coffee, sprained wrists and ankles, broken arms, because planes flew so much in turbulence, and passengers going in and out of Denver and Salt Lake City had to be prepared. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you saw somebody get embarrassingly ill on a jetliner? Just doesn't happen anymore. But in the days of propeller planes, it was commonplace. Well, in spite of the air sickness, the bruises and bumps, the burns, America began getting back in the air, feeling safe because there was a nurse on board. Americans were discovering that if they had the money, the best way to get from point A to point B was by air, and a growing number of cities vied for airline service. Then in 1940, something happened to the airlines that people still talk about. Maybe I should say something didn't happen in 1940. Talk to any airline historian and mention 1940 and his eyes will light up, because 1940 was the first year not a single person died in the crash of a major passenger plane. And don't you think the airlines called every radio network and newspaper to let them know about that? The good news was a shot in the arm, and as 1941 dawned, the airlines were on a roll. Revenues were up. Flights were increasing. The future looked bright. America was in the air. Hollywood stars were being photographed, not getting off a train, but getting off a plane. But just as the nation's airlines were beginning to plan for the future and the public again focused on the high frontier, America was plunged into war. December 8th, 1941. If you mention the word airplane to people, the image would not be that of a sleek passenger plane winging its way across the U.S., but of a harbor left smoldering and weeping at Pearl Harbor because of an attack by air. For the next 4 years, the focus was on war, not on wandering, but the airplane would be put to use, evolving during wartime, again as a fighting machine on both sides of the conflict. And the lessons learned in combat would, in an ironic way, lead us to the third chapter of aviation. After World War II, millions of GIs came home, and they all had a wider view of the world. Most of them had flown, and probably in a DC-3. They wanted to get back into the air again and take their wives with them. If they didn't want to go to the battlefield, they wanted to go to some leisure destination. Shortly after the war, the British aircraft maker de Havilland introduced the first commercial jet plane for passengers. It was called the Comet. Now, the Comet was a beautiful, sleek plane. The jets were inside the wings. It had state-of-the-art electronics, and the pilots tell us it handled beautifully. It began London to New York service, went to other parts of the world, but in the next 3 years, 3 Comets would disappear from the air, the victim of something we knew nothing about until that time, metal fatigue. You see, the Comet's skin was too thin, and it had square windows, and at the corner of those windows, cracks would start. And on those 3 planes, the cracks started and kept going, and the planes literally exploded in midair. Then Boeing came forward with its own transatlantic aircraft, the 707, based on a military plane. All they did was change a few things. It had heavier skin. They put round windows in it. And during the air show in Seattle, the test pilot for the 707, Tex Johnston, did something that drove the president of Boeing crazy. He took the plane over the crowd, this huge 4-jet passenger plane, and he did a double barrel roll. But before they could fire Tex Johnston, the Boeing officials realized that every airline in the world was rushing forward with a checkbook. If you can do aerobatics in that plane, they thought, we want one. Pan Am ordered 45 of them. By the way, decades later, Pan Am would again push Boeing to bet the farm on a new design of what became the 747. Today's planes are faster, more fuel efficient, and they're certainly larger. Have you seen the coverage of that new Airbus 380 that can carry 850 people on 2 levels? Today's planes are controlled by satellites. Most of the new ones can literally take off and land themselves. You know, every moment of every hour around the clock, every moment, a plane is either taking off or landing. Tens of millions of people are transported by air every year. The world is literally tied together with airplanes. And this was hammered home the day after 9/11, when all aircraft in the U.S. were grounded. How quiet the skies were. It was dramatic proof of just how pervasive aviation had become and how aviation is the lifeblood of America. For too many of us, though, aviation is ho-hum, it's old hat. Flying is as commonplace as taking the bus. But don't tell that to the people who love aircraft, for every landing and takeoff is breathtaking. Former pilot Ernest Gans, in his book Fate is the Hunter, wrote something I would like to paraphrase. He said, the next time you're talking to a pilot and his eyes stray from you and look skyward, it is probably because a plane is going over. Forgive him for not paying attention to you, for part of his heart is there. The age of aviation is actually a speck on the timeline of history. The fulfilled dream of 2 reclusive bicycle makers from Dayton, Ohio, is the glue that holds the nation together. Any of us can soar with the eagles. Any of us can rise above the clouds. We can have early breakfast in London, late lunch in Los Angeles, and supper in Honolulu. The air lanes of the world are the streets of the global village. The poet tells us that when man took flight, he broke the surly bonds of earth and reached up and touched the face of God. That is true, but man did more than that. He fulfilled the dreams of 1,000,000 years. He saw a new world through the eyes of 2 young men from Ohio staring into the sun as they harnessed the winds of Kitty Hawk. Thank you very much.